Hey, it's Raj from 3CB Performance. Manchester United striker Marcus Rashford has been diagnosed with a double stress fracture in his lumbar low back region and a loose body in his talus curl ankle joint that requires surgical removal. In this video, I'll explain Rashford's injuries, return timeline, and a potentially troubling injury risk-reward pattern at Manchester United. Let's begin with the less serious of the injuries. A loose body or bone in the talus curl ankle joint typically refers to a small fragment or fragments of cartilage and or bone that chipped off and are floating around in the joint's fluid space, aka the synovium. Typically, this injury is due to repetitive stress and wear and tear on the ankle joint and or in combination with an overt ankle injury like Rashford had in March 2019, which can create cartilage defects or exacerbate already existing ones. To remove those fragments, Rashford will undergo a minimally invasive arthroscopic procedure in which the surgeon inserts tiny instruments through tiny holes called portals. It's a relatively mild outpatient procedure, and the recovery timeline depends on the extent of fragments removed, but pro footballers will typically be back on the pitch in a matter of weeks. However, this injury and procedure isn't the rate-determining step in this Rashford equation. It's reported that Rashford was playing through a lumbar, low back, stress fracture prior to coming off the bench for a 16-minute appearance against Wolverhampton on January 15th. He reportedly picked up a second stress fracture during that game after being caught by Wolves player Matt Doherty. The stress fractures are most likely what's known as a pars fracture, with pars referring to the pars interarticularis, which is a small region of bone in the lumbar low back spine. These stress fractures typically occur in football due to repetitive stress from lumbar extension and twisting. They may begin as stress reactions, which are micro changes in the bone with little to no symptoms, which is potentially why Rashford was able to play through it, and then worsen into stress fractures with prolonged stress or an acute impact. There's no definitive research-based guideline for return to play after this injury, but the consensus is roughly 8 weeks of rehab and ramping up activity, with a key criteria being pain-free hyperextension and trunk rotation prior to returning to the pitch. That timeline would potentially see Rashford return for the end of the Premier League season, but it's not out of the question that he misses the rest of the season, particularly if he has what's known as a bilateral pars fracture, meaning there are stress fractures on each side of the same vertebral level. This is considered more serious because there may be some instability in the vertebra with increased risk of nerve symptoms. Regardless of that, most footballers are back within a maximum of 4 months, which could give Rashford roughly a month cushion prior to Euro 2020. Rashford attempting to play through a pars stress reaction or stress fracture isn't uncommon, as the symptoms often don't manifest for an extended period of time and the injury is deemed a low-risk issue. For example, the American football team Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Carson Wentz played through a stress reaction during the 2018 season for multiple weeks in a much more physical sport until he was finally shut down after the injury evolved over time, according to coach Doug Peterson. That being said, if Rashford's case was simply a one-off this season, I wouldn't bat an eyelash at it. The reality is that medical decision-making is full of gray area and uncertainty, so even if the process is perfect, the outcome may not be. Further, we're not privy to many details, so I always give the benefit of the doubt to the medical staff. However, this is now the third case in a matter of months where we've seen a ManU player attempt to play through injury and make it worse. Previously, Paul Pogba played versus Arsenal 5 days after suffering a micro fissure in his right foot versus Rochdale on September 25th, which set off a series of events that's seen him suffer multiple setbacks and subsequent ankle injuries and eaten up most of his season thus far. Most recently, Scott McTominay, aka McT, played 43 plus minutes after suffering right knee ligament damage in the second minute versus Newcastle on Boxing Day. I want to emphasize that it's not my place to assign blame or even make the attempt, because there's so many variables we don't know on the outside looking in. It could be that these three scenarios playing out similarly in a short span of time is mere coincidence, or there's potentially some disconnect when calculating risk-reward and the decisions that have followed. We'll have another data point for or against that trend, depending on how things play out with Rashford moving forward. That's a wrap for this video. Thanks for watching. My goal is to provide you with in-depth, evidence-based, narrative-free analysis. You can always find me on IG and Twitter at 3CB Performance. Make sure to sub to the channel and follow along on all social media for the latest updates. 3CB out.